Hey, my name's Izzy. This is Rolling Virtual Cards coming at you with another Commander deck build. This time we've got Goldberry, River Daughter, counter this. It's a joke because the counters are the things you put on the creatures in this deck, not the things that you use to stop people from doing stuff. Let's get right into this. Goldberry, River Daughter is 1 and a blue for a 1/3 nymph. Tap, move a counter of each kind not on Goldberry, River Daughter from another target permanent you control onto Goldberry. For a blue, you can tap her, move 1 or more counters from Goldberry onto another target permanent you control. If you do, draw a card. So, let's talk Goldberry. Is she good? Is she fun? First off, she's cute. I like her outfit. She's definitely slaying. So that's my critique on the art. Outside of the art, she's not a good commander. She's an interesting commander, but she's not good. She's all over the place. Well, not all over the place. What she's doing just isn't good enough nowadays yet. I think in the future, there may be a point in time where her counter stuff can be abused. There's a few abuses of it in here, but that we'll get into. But for the most part, it's kind of hard to use it and do anything with it. She's just... if you're looking for an interesting commander, that's what she is. She's definitely an interesting commander. I can say that for the least. Let's zoom in a little. Thanks. Oh, that's too zoomy. 1 up. There we go. So she's definitely interesting in that regard. But is she good? Probably not. But let's get into the 99s. I still like talking about these lesser commanders because somebody out there who's actually read Lord of the Rings, not just watched it but read it, knows who Goldberry River Daughter is. Knows that, if I remember, she is the wife of Tom Bombadil. And wants to go, yeah, let's do this. The rest of us just look at her thigh and go, let's do that. So that's why, she's cute. That's why I built her originally. She was one of the first ones that came out that I'm like, yeah, okay, let's do that. Let's do that. So let's get into this. But first, I'll just ask politely, subscribe? Thanks. Copper Tapper is 2 generic for a 1/1 mirror. Tap, put a charge counter on target artifact. Sacrifice copper mirror, put 2 charge counters on target artifact. So, why is this here? Well, the main thing with Goldberry is that move 1 or more counters from Goldberry onto a target permanent you control if you draw a card. So, what it does is you can kind of like... Using Proliferate, you can break the game. So putting a charge counter on target artifact, let's say you put it on Core Tapper, and then you put one on... you put one on Core Tapper, and then you use Goldberry's effect to steal it, right? Then next turn, you put another one on Core Tapper. This allows Thrumming Bird to hit someone, proliferate twice, right? So Thrumming Bird is 1 in a blue for a 1/1. Phyrexian Bird, horror with flying, when it deals combat damage to player, proliferate, right? So now you're proliferating the one on Goldberry and the one on Core Tapper, giving you 4 counters, charge counters, instead of just the 2 you would have with Core Tapper. 1, 2, 3 you would have, because you would proliferate it. So instead it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So that's what you end up with. You end up with an extra one. And that just enlarges as you're using Goldberry to move all these counters, because it's not just the one on Goldberry, it's every individual counter you get to put an extra one on her, and then you can start moving 1 or more counters from her onto other things to get that like push. So the Core Tapper is a way to just kind of just start moving around charge counters. Thrumming Bird double is proliferation. Flux Channeler is 1 in a blue for a 2/2 human wizard, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. Crystal Crawler is 4 generic for a 1/1 construct with Converge, it enters the battlefield with 1/1 counter on it. For each color mana spent to cast it, since you're in one color deck, it only comes in with 1. You can remove a 1/1 counter from him to add 1 to your mana pool and tap it to put a 1/1 counter on Christian Caller, right? Well, the thing is again, you're proliferating all those, but if you keep proliferating and put 1/1 counters on Goldberry, you can eventually move them all over to Crystalline and just get a lot of mana that way. Etched Oracle is 4 for 0/0, which with Sunburst, so it'll enter with 1/1 counter, but you can remove 4 counters from it to target player draw 3 cards, which might seem hard, but in a deck where you can transfer all these different counters to her and then move them all into Etched Oracle, you end up with a really, like, oh cool, now it has like a bunch of, like, it's got 8 1/1 counters, let's just, or 9, let's say. You can pay 1 and then draw 3 and then pay 1 and then draw 3. Glen Alindra Archmage is 3 in a blue for a 2/2 fairy wizard with flying, and you can pay 1 to sacrifice it, or you can pay 1 blue to sacrifice it and counter target non-creature spell, and then persist. Which means when it dies, it comes back with a -1/-1 counter. But Glen Alindra can steal that -1/-1 counter. And if Glen Alindra has a +1/+1 counter, it'll break each other out. You can also just remove a 1/1 counter over to Glen to put it down to nothing. So then you can keep using it. It's just like repeatable non-creature counter. And Tekuthal Inquiry Dominus is 2 and 2 blue for a 3/5 Phyrexian Horror with flying. And if you would proliferate twice instead. And then for 1 and 2 Phyrexian blue, you can remove 3 counters from among other artifacts and or creatures or planeswalkers you control. Put an indestructible counter on it. And that's pretty good. It's pretty easy to get that off if you want to protect it. You can do that at instant speed to protect it from like your opponents and stuff. But the main thing is the double proliferation. Just really helps you keep the game going. Let's talk about sorceries. We only got 2. We got a Contentious Plan, which is 1 in a blue for a sorcery that proliferates and then draw a card. And Tezzeret's Gambit, which is 3 in a Phyrexian blue for a sorcery that just draws you 2 cards and then proliferates. Again, the proliferating thing is going on here. And only 4 instances. Experimental Augur is 1 in a blue for an instant. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them in your hand, the rest in the bottom of the library in any order, and then you proliferate. Rejected Imperfection is 1 and 2 blue for an instant. Counter target spell. If that spell's mana value is 3 or less, you proliferate. Steady Progress is 2 in a blue for an instant that just proliferates and then you draw a card. And Fuel for the Cause is 2 and 2 blue for an instant. Counter target spell, then proliferate. Not the best, but it kind of fits the theme. And then 46 artifacts. Astra Cornucopia is 3x for an artifact that enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it, and you can tap it to choose a color and add 1 mana of that color for each charge counter on it. You can get this pretty big with your commander. Joust the Void is 2x for an artifact, and when it enters the battlefield, charge with X charge counters on it. When a player casts a spell with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on him, counter that spell. With your commander, because you can do it at instant speed, you can counter spells. Like you can change the spell cost if you want to. Energized Explosives is X for an artifact with Sunburst, and then you can pay 2 and sacrifice it and destroy each non-permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Engineered Explosion. Good board wipe. That fits the theme. Everflowing Chalice is 0 for an artifact with multi-kick 2, and then when it enters the battlefield, you put a charge counter for each time it's kicked, and it taps for a colorless for each charge counter. Again, you can get this really big. This is one of the win cons. Orochi Hatchery is 2x for an artifact, and when it's the battlefield with X charge counter, and for 5, you can tap it to put a 1/1 green snake creature token on the battlefield for each charge counter on Orochi Hatchery. So you get a bunch of counters on it, and then you just keep tapping it and making more snakes as an attempt to win. Animation Module is 1 generic for an artifact, and whenever 1 or more 1/1 counters be placed on a permanent you control, you can pay 1 to make a 1/1 servo artifact creature token. And for 3, you can tap it to choose a counter on target permanent or player, give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. This kind of just helps produce more and keep doing that stuff and spread the love around everywhere. Plus, getting servos can help you win the game. Luxury Goddess Gift is Giada's Gift is 1 generic for a legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. Equipped permanent isn't a planeswalker and is a creature in addition to its other types. Loyalty abilities can still be activated. Equipped planeswalker 1 and equipped 3. So yes, putting this in the planeswalker is easier, but just putting this on your commander who has a lot of counters on it all of a sudden can win you the game too. Or take someone out at least. Soul Ring is 1 generic for an artifact that taps for 2 colorless. The Ozolith is 1 generic for a legendary artifact, and whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had a counter on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozoliths have counters on it, you may move all counters from all Ozoliths onto target creature. This just makes it so that, like, if your commander is removed, you can put all the counters on the Ozolith and eventually put them back on her, which is helpful. It's also an expensive card, so I suggest proxying it, of course. Arcane Signet's 2 generic for an artifact, and it taps for any color in your commander's identity. Contagion Clasp is 2 generic for an artifact, and it enters the battlefield. You put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, and for 4 you can tap and proliferate. Culling Diaz is 2 generic for an artifact that you tap and sacrifice a creature to put a charge counter on it, and then you can pay 1 and sacrifice Culling Diaz, draw a card for each charge counter on it. Normally it's sacrifice creatures. You don't, in this deck, you can just move a charge counter onto your commander and then move it from your commander onto Culling Diaz, and then you keep adding more of them each turn to just get to the point where you can draw. Follower Stone is 2 generic for an artifact that taps for any color your opponents can produce with lands. Gavel of Righteous, 2 generic for an equipment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a charge counter on Gavel of Righteousness. A Gavel of the Righteous. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each counter on Gavel of the Righteous. As long as the Gavel of the Righteous has 4 or more counters, the equipped creature has double strike. Equip, pay 3, or remove a counter from the Gavel of Righteousness. So the Gavel's good. It's another way to just kind of like spin out of control. Gridlock is 2 generic for an artifact. You can tap it to put a charge counter on it, and then you can tap it. Target player puts the top X cards of the library into the graveyard where X is the number of charge counters in Gridlock. You can mill someone out with this deck. Investigation Journal is 2 generic for an artifact clue, and when it enters the battlefield with a number of suspect counters on it equal to the greatest number of counters or creatures a player controls. And for 2, you can remove a suspect counter to draw a card, and for 2, you can sacrifice it to draw a card. But you can keep putting subject counters back on it, suspect counters back on it, to keep drawing a card for 2 mana. Lotus Bloom is 2 generic for an artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a petal counter on Lotus Bloom. Tap, sacrifice Lotus Petal, add X mana, where X is the number of petal counters on the Lotus Bloom. You can keep putting more and more petal counters on it faster with your commander. Maze Mine Tomb is 2 generic for an artifact, and you can tap it to put a page counter on it, scry 1. Tap it and put a page counter on it, draw a card, and when there's 4 or more page counters in exiling, you gain 4 life. You can keep removing page counters from this so that you never have to worry about running out your draw. Mind Stone is 2 generic for an artifact that taps for a colorless, and for 1 you can tap it and sacrifice it to draw a card. Noble's Purse is 2 generic for an artifact, and when it enters the battlefield with 3 coin counters in it, tap it, remove a coin counter from it, create a treasure token. But you can just keep making more and more counters on it so you never run out. Pinted Prism is 2 generic for an artifact with Sunburst, and remove a charge counter from it and add a mana of any color, but you can keep putting the charge counters on it so you don't run out. Prowl Conduit is 2 generic for an artifact, and you can remove a counter from a permanent you control. Choose 1. Put a charge counter on target artifact, or put a 1/1 counter on target creature. That's just a nice way to keep going. Ratchet Bomb is 2 generic for an artifact, and you can tap it to put a charge counter on Ratchet Bomb, and then you can tap it to sacrifice Ratchet Bomb to destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of card counters on Ratchet Bomb. Scroll of Masters is 2 generic for an artifact, and whenever a non-creature spell you put into... whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a lower counter on Scroll of Masters, and for 3 generic, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each lore counter on the Scroll of Masters. You can keep adding more scroll counters, but then on top of that, it's a win con because you can get your commander really big. Sword of Hours is 2 generic for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature attacks, put a 1/1 counter on it. And whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage, roll a d12. If the result is greater than the damage dealt, or the result is 12, double the number of 1/1 counters on the creature. Equip 2. Just a good way to win or take someone out. Tablet of Completion. Tablet of Completion is 2 generic for an artifact. You can tap to put an oil counter on the Tablet of Completion. Tap to add a colorless. Activate only if the Tablet of completion has 2 or more oil counters on it. And for 1, you can tap to draw a card and activate only if it has 5 or more oil counters. You can get to that 5 pretty fast, so you can start drawing cards. The Filigree Silex is too generic for a legendary artifact that you can tap to put oil counter on it, and you can sacrifice to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of oil counters on it. Or you can tap it to remove 10 oil counters from it, and permanent you control and oil counters from among permanents you control, and sacrifice the Filigree Silex. It deals 10 damage to any target. I've used it to like remove a player from the game quickly. Thought Vessel is too generic for an artifact, and you can tap it. You may have no maximum hand size tap at a colorless. Umezawa's Jitte is too generic for legendary artifact equipment, and when equipped creature deals combat damage, put 2 charge counters on it, and you can remove a charge counter from Umezawa's Jitte to choose one. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 till return, or target creature gets -1 and -1, or you gain 2 life. This is a great way to keep yourself alive, but also just, again, to knock someone out, because if you get enough charge counters on it, you can just, oh look, let me just remove 10, and now it's +20/+20, you know? Coalition Relic is 3 generic for an artifact, and then you tap it for 1 mana of any color, or you can tap it to put a charge counter on it, and at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, remove all charge counters from the Coalition Relic, add 1 mana of any color for each charge counter. Remove this way. The way this is kind of works is you tap it on your turn to put a charge counter on it, and then on your upkeep, you untap it, and you tapped again to put another charge counter, so then at your pre-combat main phase, you have two color on it added. But if you can keep adding more charge counters to it, you can keep getting more mana out of it. Glistening Sphere is 3 generic for an artifact when it's the battlefield tapped, but when it enters, you also proliferate. And you can tap for a mana of any color and corrupt it. If there's 3 or more, add 3 mana of any one color, activate only if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters. You don't normally get that. This is just here to proliferate. Golem Foundry is 3 generic for an artifact, and whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may put charge counter on Golem Factory. Remove 3 charge counters from Golem Foundry. Put a 3/3 colorless Golem artifact token onto the battlefield. So this is again just another way to just get more artifact or more creatures out. Iker Gauntlet is 2 and a blue for an artifact. Planeswalkers you control have 0 proliferate and 12 take an extra turn after this one. When you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent. Put an additional counter of that kind of the permanent. That is why it's here, because it's like baby proliferate, but it's baby proliferate, still proliferate. Magistry Scepter is 3 generic for an artifact. For 4, you can tap it and put a charge counter, and you can tap it to remove 3 charge counters, take an extra turn at this one. You can get some extra turns going with this deck. Not infinite, but some decent. If you have proliferate enough, you can. Staff of Completion is 3 generic for an artifact. Tap it to pay 1 to destroy a target permanent you own. Tap it to pay 2 life and add 1 mana of any color. Tap it and pay 3 life to proliferate, 4 life to draw a card, and pay for 5 you can untap it. But that proliferate's really what it's here for. It's meant to just be able to like get a lot of stuff. And actually, yeah, if you can just keep proliferating, so you have like 6 counters, and then you get back up to like 4 counters, and you can get back up to 4 counters, and then you can get back up to 4 counters. That's what you want to be able to do. Because if you can keep getting back into your counters, you can just take infinite turns. And your commander does give you at least one of those. Strixhaven Stadium is 3 generic for an artifact, and you can tap it for a colorless and put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium. When a creature deals combat damage to you, remove a point counter from it. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you put a point counter on it. Then if there's 10 or more point counters on it, remove all of them, and that player loses the game. Good way to just remove a player. Sword of the Truth and Justice is 3 generic for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and protection from white and blue. And when equipped creature deals damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it and proliferate. Titan Forge is 3 generic for an artifact, and for 3 you can tap it to put a forge counter on it, or charge counter on it, and then for 3, and then you can just tap it to remove 3 charge counters from it to make a 9/9 colorless Golem artifact creature. This is great. Getting a huge 9/9 is gross. Transmogrifying Wand is 3 generic for an artifact, and it enters the battlefield with 3 charge counters in it, and for 1 you can tap it and remove a charge counter from it to destroy target creature. Its controller creates a 2/4 white Ox creature token. Activate this ability only anytime you can activate sorcery, but you can keep the charge counters on it so you can keep removing your opponent's stuff. Vexing Puzzle Box is 3 generic for an artifact, and whenever you roll 1 or more dice, put a number of charge counters on it. equal to the result, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color and roll a d20, and then you can tap it to remove 100 charge counters on Vexing Puzzle Box, search your library for an artifact card and put it on the battlefield and shuffle. Pretty good card. Dark Steel Reactor is 4 generic for an artifact. It's indestructible, and at the beginning of the upkeep, you may put a charge counter on it. When it has 20 or more charge counters on it, you win the game. This is your main win. This is like, because you can keep putting more charge counters from her onto them, you can just go like, and it's any amount of 1 charge counter, so if you keep doing it, you just need to get 10 on him, 10 on her, and then just move the 10 over. Empowered Auto Generator is 4 generic for an artifact that is the battlefield tap, but you can tap it to put a charge counter on it, and add X mana, a charge counter on it, and then add X mana of any 1 color, where X is the number of charge counters on this, so just keep adding more and more. Lux Cannon is 4 generic for an artifact. You put a charge counter on it by tapping it, and then you can tap it to remove 3 charge counters to destroy target permanent. You can just do it more often. Otherworldly Atlas is 4 generic for an artifact, and you can put a charge counter on it by tapping it, but you can also tap it to have each player draw a card for each charge counter on it. You can get some good draw out of this and hope to win. The One Ring is in this deck. You can remove it if you want, but it just kind of fits in this case. The One Ring is 4 generic for a legendary artifact. It's indestructible, and enters the battlefield. You gain protection from everyone until your next turn. At the beginning of upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on it, but when you tap it, you put a burden counter on it, and you draw a card for each burden counter on it. Since you can add more burden counters to it, you can theoretically just draw even more cards, which, just like Otherworldly Atlas, helps you, but it's more damage and less hugs. And Contagious Instrument is 6 generic for an artifact. It enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls, and for 4 you can tap it to proliferate, then proliferate again. Very good card. Enchantments. Archmage Ascension is 2 and a blue for an enchantment at the beginning of your end step. If you control... at the beginning of each end step, if you drew 2 or more cards this turn, you may put a quest counter on it, and as long as it has 6 or more quest counters on it, if you would draw a card, you may instead search your library for a card and put it in your hand and shuffle. This card's not usually great because it takes forever to get 6 or more quest counters, but again, in this deck, it's not as hard. As Foretold is 2 in the blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a time counter on As Foretold, and then once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost of the spell you cast with the mana value X or less, where X is the number of time counters on it. So, yeah, you can just get that number higher. Inexorable Tide is 3 and 2 blue for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell, proliferate. This is, again, just a useful spell. Being able to proliferate every time you cast a spell is helpful. And lands. There's actually some cool lands. Blast Zone comes into the battlefield with a charge counter and taps your colors, but you can pay 2x to put a charge counter on it, and for 3 you can sacrifice it to destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on it. Forge of Heroes taps your colors, but you can choose a target commander that enter the battlefield this turn to put a 1/1 counter on it. Islands. Karn's Bastion taps for a colorless, but you can pay 4 to tap it for proliferate. And then Mage Ring's Network taps for a colorless, but you can pay 1 to tap it to put a storage counter on it, and you can tap it to remove a storage counter from it to add a colorless for each storage counter removed this way. And then Magosea, the Water Veil, is a land into the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it for colors, but you can also pay blue and tap it to put an Eon counter on it and skip your next turn. And then you can tap it to remove an Eon counter from it and return it to your hand, take an extra turn after this one. So the way this kind of works is weird. The idea is you can get... because it returns to your hand, it's hard. But the idea is kind of to put an Eon counter on it. And if you always have an Eon counter on your commander, you can keep putting Eon counters on it. So it enters the battlefield tapped, right? But the way, instead of having to lose it. So you lose the turn once because you need to put an Eon counter on it. And then you steal that Eon counter. And then you can proliferate and add an Eon counter that way, and then remove the Eon counter, and then return it to your hand to take an extra turn after this one. And then you can play Magus tapped if you didn't play a land that turn. So then you take your extra turn, it untaps Magus, you tap your commander to put the Eon counter on Magosea. Requires you to have, like, proliferating constantly still, which the deck does, so that you can keep that 1 Eon counter on your commander. But if you can keep doing that, you can technically take infinite turns. It's weird and slow and doesn't work very well, but it is possible. Nesting Grounds is a land that taps for colors, but for 1 you can move a counter from target permanent you control to another target permanent you control. That also works with it. Saprazian Scry is a land that enters the battlefield tap with 2 depletion counters. You can remove a depletion counter from it to add 2 blue to your mana pool. If there's no depletion counters on it, sacrifice it. Again, just helps with your commander. The Monumental Facade is a land sphere that... Kitty cat, why do you have to be annoying? She keeps scratching at the window right now. That enters with 2 oil counters. You can tap it to add a colorless. You can remove an oil counter, or you can tap it to remove an oil counter. Put an oil counter on target artifact or creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. There's like 1 card that you're doing oil counters with. Titanium or Tyrite Sanctum is what does it do? I don't know why that. Oh, yeah, it's because of that then. It's a land that taps for a colorless. You can pay 2 to tap it to target land. Legendary creature you control becomes a god in addition to its other types. And gets a 1/1 counter. And then you can sacrifice it for 4 and tapping it and put in a destructive power counter on target god. I am just getting my cat to stop that. She's being annoying. And Vivid Creek comes in with 2 charge counters. You can tap it for colors, or you can remove a charge counter, add 1 mana of any color. Is it needed? No, not at all. But it's a charge counter, so I added it because it was fun. This deck isn't really good, if you can't tell. It's not doing a lot for anyone. It's not really achieving much. This is like if you wanted to play, what's the commander? Atraxa. But you wanted it to be worse and weirder and harder to use. Then, sure, yeah, you can use it. That's fine. This is that cat, by the way. This is that annoying cat. But, like, it just doesn't do enough. There's some interesting ideas, and maybe at some point we'll get more interesting ideas that float around in blue for counters that just like, oh yeah, this is great. But there's just not enough. And since there's not enough, you just kind of run into this half-baked deck that kind of like wants to proliferate to try to get more counters on, but then also wants to be able to like do other stuff. It's weird. It does weird things. Is she fun? I think so. I enjoy it. Kind of. There's one other issue, and there's a reason why I tell people just don't. You need to identify what counters on Goldberry. So you need to have individualistic counters, which usually mean like different colored dice, hopefully. And then you identify what those dice colors are and don't lie about them. Okay? It gets more complicated than you think. But it can be fun, and I think in the future this deck will get even stronger. So, fun commander, not great though. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace. Have a great day, guys.